Our next speaker is Scott Horsley of the Horsley-Witten Group. And I first heard Scott speak at a Water, Science, and Society, there's another S in there, I don't remember what it is, last fall. And he was a captivating speaker, and we had a conversation afterwards, and he's just got a mind that goes in many places in many ways. And in fact, one of his students, whom I shall not mention, has told me that he is just a wonderful teacher, but his course has so much work. However, we're not taking his course tonight, so we can just enjoy him for 15 minutes, or 20, whatever we have here. Scott Horsley.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. The course really isn't that much work. It's a lot of fun. But so I'm going to speak to you tonight about green infrastructure, and I'm going to highlight some work that we're doing in a few places. Cape Cod is one. Another one is New York City. I picked those two places because they're a little bit different, and they are providing different solutions for different reasons. In Cape Cod, it's a nutrient issue. Some of you may have heard there was a lawsuit down there challenging the 15 towns to clean up the waters to bring it in compliance with the Clean Water Act. So it's a nutrient issue there. In New York City, it's a CSO, combined sewer overflow flooding issue. And we're using green infrastructure both places. And the other thing I'll say at the outset, because I don't have any slides on it, is in addition to the sort of water quality benefits, there are some hydrologic restoration benefits that go along with the last presentation. So I'll try to touch some of that. So on the Cape, we're really looking at a whole bunch of what we call non-traditional technologies. Things that really haven't been tried too much before, and we're really focusing on that. There was a study done a few years ago that showed that it would cost about $6 billion to solve the Cape's nutrient problems using traditional conventional sewering projects. So we're really looking outside the box there. And the other thing I'll say at the outset is, to the best of our judgment, the things I'm going to show you, on average, are running about half the cost compared to traditional gray infrastructure. So, and again, I could provide a lot of documentation on that later if you'd like. I know that's a general statement, but that's pretty much where it's working out. And that's true in both Cape Cod and New York City. We're applying this stuff. So this slide you're looking at, you're probably wondering what it is. And I'm going to tell you that this is a wastewater treatment plant, but one that uses green infrastructure. This is actually at the Omega facility in upstate New York. And so there are, even within the sort of realm of gray infrastructure with collection systems and treatment systems, we can design in some living systems, vegetative systems, as opposed to a series of tanks and pumps, as we call it. And again, in fact, this stuff works very, very well. And I'll also want to make sure that, in case I don't mention it along the way, there's a lot of co-benefits that go along with this. I'm talking about nutrients and flood control, but as Michael, is that right, is saying, a lot of jobs, which we think will come as a part of this. And a lot of the other ecological, hydrologic restoration benefits as well. So one of our big nutrient or green infrastructure technologies on Cape Cod is oysters. That's a pretty nice thing to be able to sell as an alternative to a wastewater treatment plant, isn't it? And as it turns out, there's been a lot of this going on in the Chesapeake. We've got a number of projects, pilot projects underway on Cape Cod. And what we're finding is that these guys are tremendous filter feeders. They pull the plankton and other organics out of the water column. We get more or less immediate results in terms of water clarity, reduction in nutrients, and of course we're providing a lot of jobs here. So of the 15 towns, I would say about 6 or 7 of them are already investing some pretty serious money and efforts into both restoration of natural shellfish beds and also aquaculture, both geared towards nutrient removal, as an alternative to wastewater treatment plants. So that's an interesting one. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about is sort of road layouts. We talked about impervious surfaces just a few minutes ago, and I agree wholeheartedly with the presentation about all the effects here. So this is an alternative road layout in a development area, alternative to, you can see sort of in the background here, the classic cul-de-sac. So in a lot of developments, our local regulations require prescriptively the layout of that lollipop-shaped cul-de-sac. Here's the picture of what it looks like, which is obviously a lot of pavement, prevents that recharge from getting into the groundwater. Obviously, no vegetative surfaces, some local heat island effect, et cetera. So I'll just flash back here. This is another form of green infrastructure, and it has to do with how planning boards and local agencies permit development. So there are some very good alternatives to some of the conventional stuff that, and by the way, it's a lot less expensive to build too. So once you get the developers educated, they're all for this as well. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, building things like that for residential subdivision. This one I think was to get to like 3 homes. So that's a lot of impervious surface to create to get a few cars down there. And again, I'll tell you seriously, there are many communities in Massachusetts where we've talked to them about doing the alternative stuff, and they say, great idea, but we can't do it here because the regulations don't allow it. So a lot of this has to do with changing the local regulations to make this work. Here's a different looking kind of sidewalk. Some of this stuff, by the way, comes from the Pacific Northwest. I think this slide may be one of them. And this is what we call green streets. And what they've done here is gone in and retrofitted a sidewalk and brought in green infrastructure. And this is the stormwater management system. So instead of a network of subsurface, what we call closed drainage system, which is very expensive, hard to maintain, and provides little or no treatment, here we have something that's real low cost to build, looks good, provides much better water quality treatment, and much easier to maintain. So it's plus, plus, plus. And this is the kind of thing that we're trying to get built more from the get-go, but there are a lot of projects underway as retrofit projects to go in and basically tear up streets and green them. So some exciting stuff happening. I mentioned New York City because one of the comments or questions I get when I give talks on green infrastructure is, great idea, but I'm in a very urban place, so we can't use that. So that's when I say, well, what about New York City? That's pretty urban, isn't it? So we have a contract. We're the subcontractors to Hazen and Sawyer. New York City has a consent order from the state of New York that requires them to fix their combined sewer overflow problems, and they're required to do that by using at least 10% green infrastructure. So our prime contractor, Hazen and Sawyer, who's doing all the gray infrastructure work, brought us on because they don't do a lot of that green infrastructure work. And we're having a friendly competition. They've got 90% of the budget. We've got 10% of the budget, which we're happy with because we're little guys, and that's still a lot of money to us because New York City is a big place. And we're having this friendly competition looking at each project to compare how much CSO flood control is being accomplished per dollar of infrastructure. And again, we're coming in about half the cost. The gray infrastructure in this place are large subsurface tunnels you've probably heard of that most cities build to store the stormwater. And we do that here in Boston, by the way, and then we pump it out to Deer Island. So again, the alternative is something like this. This is showing, much like that other slide, cutting into a sidewalk and building a little bioretention. So I also want to point out this is not just theory, we're building them. We have people in New York City pretty much every day, 5 days a week, doing soil testing and constructing these. Next time you're down that way in the Bronx, Brooklyn area, there's a lot of these that have already been built. And again, the city likes them, they're working, and they're cost effective. So very simple infrastructure here. You can see the curb cut, the stormwater goes in there into the planted area, back out the other end. The soils have to be right, we're trying to infiltrate and recharge as much of the water as possible. And so again, New York City. So if anybody says to you, you can't do green infrastructure because it's too urban, remember these slides and refer them to the city. This is real close to home. This is Post Office Square, downtown Boston, the financial district. And this is one of my favorite projects. We've probably lost more money on this project than any other project we've worked on. We're doing it pretty much pro bono at this point. But it's a beautiful little pocket park. And the friends of Post Office Square came to us a couple years ago and said, you know, does it really make sense for us to be bringing water from the Quabbin Reservoir to irrigate this park in the middle of Boston? And also, this is I'm told that this is the deepest structure in the city of Boston. It's a 7-story garage, all below grade. So if you know anything about hydrology, the water table's probably down there somewhere, right? So to get the water table down to keep the parking garage dry, they have 2 large wells that they pump 24/7, 365. So we came up with this incredibly brilliant idea. Why don't you use that water instead of the Quabbin water? And they thought it was a great idea. So we've been working. So the idea was easy, like anything else. But I'll tell you, getting the permits for this has been a nightmare. We are now at the construction stage, so I can talk about it. It's going to happen, but it took us a lot of permitting time because we're doing something different. So, oops, there's my bicycle. This is another thing that I like to say as a form of green infrastructure. Here's another real expensive high-tech stormwater design. Put a curb cut in and drain the water into the surrounding wooded area. And where you have room to do that, I think that makes a lot more sense than going to a leaching catch basin or some other structure like that. So this is, again, a recommendation that we're looking at on Cape Cod to deal with some of the nutrient problems, to use the existing natural green infrastructure, the forested area, to assimilate the stormwater runoff. You've all heard about green roofs, so that has to be on my list here. That's sort of the classic. That's the sedum roof that is drought resistant, and these things take pretty well. We're seeing a lot more and more of that here in this area. EPA has one at their office down in Boston, which is also Post Office Square, which you can go see. Is that right, Myra? It's visible to the public. They can go in and look at that. So there's a number of them. Save the Bay has one in Rhode Island. There's a lot more of these happening. In fact, there's a company here in Somerville that was affiliated with Tufts that's doing design work and construction on green roofs as well. So this is up and coming. And they don't have to just be that simple sedum roof. We're starting to see them integrated with, useful spaces on the roof. In this case, sort of a sitting area, whatnot. We have another project we worked with recently in Cambridge, a new residential development right down at the Alewife T Station, which is a transit-oriented development area. And they're putting a green roof on in the residential building as an outdoor elevated park area for the people that live in the building. So that'll be another one very close to the Alewife T Station. That's under construction right now, too. So we're seeing some nice green roofs come around. We can also design green infrastructure into the building. This is sort of where the architect and the landscape architect come together. And again, if you're in an urban setting, you don't have a lot of room to do things, but you can use part of the building or associated part of the building, and instead of just having it be nice-looking landscaping, that can be a functional part of the building to capture rainwater and process that. Again, one of my pet peeves is, for those local, and I suspect a lot of people are, you walk down Commonwealth Avenue, Back Bay in Boston, and everybody's got one of those nice little gardens in front of their house. Beautiful, and then you see the downspout from the roof coming down right through the garden into the ground, and then you see a sprinkler there. Again, Quabbin water being sprinkled, and there's the downspout from the roof going right through the garden. Every time I walk through the Back Bay, I think about that. So that can be done here. Just use the rainwater from the building, from the roof, to do that irrigation, and that's certainly another form. So here's one of my favorite topics. I got a few of my students here, so you know that I get very passionate about this. So the big problem we have on the Cape Cod, again, is nutrients. And if you look at where it's coming from, most of it's coming from wastewater. And if you look at where it's coming from within the wastewater, I'm glad we ate first, by the way, and had this talk afterwards. 90% of the nitrogen in human wastewater is in the urine. So if we separate the urine and do something creative with it, which the Swiss have done, the Swedes have done, they've done it in China, they've done it in Australia, the Germans have done it, and now there are 5 households in the town of Falmouth on Cape Cod that are trying this out. And the idea, of course, here is to separate number 1 from number 2, store it in a tank, and then, as they're doing in Europe, they're processing this and creating fertilizers to then use as opposed to commercially derived fertilizers. So we're seriously looking at this on Cape Cod, and we think this could be a real cost-effective solution, but again, there's a lot of behavioral issues here. Guys don't like to sit down, for one of them. But there's some real possibilities here, and I think an innovative potential. I found this on the web. This doesn't exist to my knowledge, but I liked it so much I had to throw it in here. And the other reason I put it in here is because I think, as I tell my students, we don't have all the solutions we need to solve these problems. Like, you can listen to me all semester, and I'll give you my top 50 things that I think are great. Ain't enough, doesn't work. So we need some new ideas. So when I see things like this, I get interested in it. And this is obviously more art than science at this point, but the point is a good point here. Try to get the urine to vegetated systems. And you can grow vegetated systems very well with urine-based fertilizers. They work very well. I will mention the Rich Earth Institute in Vermont, Bernie State. They are collecting urine and they are using it as a fertilizer on hayfields. And they're doing it very effectively. So this is, again, it's not just a crazy idea, but it's starting to happen. And golf courses. We have a lot of golf courses on Cape Cod, and I've done some calculations that suggest that the fertilizer amount that they apply, commercial fertilizers for all the golf courses on the Cape, is not too far different than all the total kilograms we need to remove from all of our estuaries to fix the problem. So when you think about this, this is pretty crazy. We have this $6 billion nutrient problem we're trying to solve. And meanwhile, we're importing commercial fertilizers that have the same exact thing we're trying to put on these golf courses, nitrogen and phosphorus, and we're putting that in the golf courses. So the idea here is to try to recapture and recirculate either nitrogen-enriched groundwater as a fertigation source to the here, or again, go back to my favorite subject, store the urine, process it either as granular fertilizer, which is relatively easy to do, or use it as a liquid fertilizer in a fertigation system and use that on the golf courses. Yes, there's the ick factor, but that's at least an hour conversation, so we can't go there. And the other technology that we're looking at, and this is the only one on the list that we don't have any experience with yet, is floating constructed wetlands. There's a lot of interesting literature out there, mostly used in freshwater systems, although they're using this in Baltimore Harbor now with some success. And the idea is to get a wetland growing, floating on some sort of a structure. These can be associated with docks, walkways, et cetera, or they can be free-floating and anchored like this. There's a gentleman by the name of John Todd, who some of you I'm sure know the name, real innovator, and he's been designing and building these with his company as one of the commercial ventures that's out there. And again, we think on the Cape, this, looking at some of the preliminary costs and the performance data, this could be a real potential solution for us. And it looks like my slides were a little out of order, so I'm just going to go back to Post Office Square just for 1 minute, and then I'm going to wrap up here. How am I doing for time? 3 minutes, okay. Let me skip that then. Whoops. This is the real deal. That's another picture. I don't know why these slides are out of order. Here we go. Last case study. Sorry about that. And I'll finish in 3 minutes. So this is another project which illustrates some of these principles and also illustrates integrated water management. So this is the Pine Hills project in Plymouth. I think it's the largest residential development in New England, 3,000 acres, 3,000 homes, village center, open space residential design. That is a groundwater water table map showing flow from left to right across the property. We were fortunate enough to get involved in day one, so they did it right, and they wanted to do it right. Whoops. So the first thing I should point out is that there is a road here, and I'll just point it right here, that runs north-south through the property. It's called Old Sandwich Road, and one of the early developers in the town by the name of the Pilgrims built that road. It's the first and most continuously used road in the United States, according to all the local sources. And when they bought the land, this developer, they already had permits to put houses all down that road and improve the road, pave it. So they decided they didn't want to do that. That's what the road looks like when they bought the land 15 years ago, and that's what it looks like today, and chances are that's what it's going to look like in perpetuity, because that's what the conservation deed restriction says. So what they opted to do is build a cluster development at 8 to 10 homes per unit, per acre, in pods throughout that 3,000 acres, and maintain a lot of open space. In fact, of the 3,000 acres, 1,000 acres is in permanent deed restriction conservation land. Another 1,000 acres is in active use, like golf courses and hiking, et cetera. And all of the 3,000 homes and village center are on the remaining 1/3 1,000 acres. So it's a really interesting example. And again, I think it's a great example of, and these guys have made a lot of money doing this, by the way. It's a very successful development. So if we can make money, and again, that's jobs, we can make money and jobs and preserve 2,000 acres or 1,000 acre of naturally vegetated and another 1,000 acres of partially vegetated land while we're making a whole bunch of money and providing homes and recreational opportunities, et cetera. That's a pretty good deal. So I do want to say that I think another potential part of this green infrastructure solution is smart growth, low impact development. I think we can do some really interesting things. That's what the landscaping looks like, not too many lawns. That's their high-tech, expensive stormwater system. What they did is they took natural swales, they built their roads around that so it would drain to the natural swales. By the way, these roads in here are 18 feet wide, which, from my knowledge, violates every town's subdivision road standards in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. These guys said they weren't not going to build wide roads, and they insisted on it. They get the regulations changed. So 18-foot, 20-foot wide roads for a 3,000 unit development. That's pretty impressive. And the last part of this is there's the water supply well. Flow, again, is left to right across the property. There's the wastewater treatment plant that we designed. We did something really novel. We put it outside the drinking water area. And then we needed to also get some irrigation wells for the golf course, so we were really smart. We put those down gradient of the wastewater treatment plant, which discharges as treated effluent to the ground. These fertigation wells recapture the groundwater that still has a fair amount of nitrogen and phosphorus in it, and then that's used on the golf courses, much like I was suggesting on Cape Cod. And here they've actually cut down on commercial fertilizer use. They've been able to document that. And I think I'm done.